Today's episode is sponsored by the Rising Tide Mastermind. The Rising Tide Mastermind is where people just like you get together every week to help each other with issues. Let's face it, issues are hard, so why start from square one when somebody can tell you what they've done with a similar issue? If this sounds like something that's interesting to you, go to scalinguph2o.com/mastermind to see if the Rising Tide Mastermind is right for you. Welcome to Scaling Up H2O, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. I'm Trace Blackmore, the host of this awesome water treatment podcast. So amazing. We are at episode 359. I am just so humbled by that number. If today, Trace, could talk to 7 years ago, Trace, and say that you would be doing episode 359, I don't think 7 years ago, Trace would have believed that. But here we are. Folks, I cannot think of anything I enjoy more than hosting this podcast for you. And it's just amazing when I get to hear from all of you, when I get to hear the ideas that you have, the things that you want me to talk about. So keep all of those things coming. And of course, it is April 12th, which means just around the corner in the United States, we are celebrating Tax Day, April 15th. Well, I don't know how much we're actually celebrating it, but we are definitely enduring it together. So why not? I thought, why not have some fun IRS facts? So the Internal Revenue Service. So here's some fun facts about the IRS. So fun fact number one, the IRS processes over 130 million returns every year. That is a lot of returns. So if you are getting a refund, you definitely want to get that in early so you're not on the bottom of that stack. Also, taxpayers spend about 4 billion hours annually complying with all the federal tax laws. Imagine how much time you spent this year contributing to that collective 4 billion hours. The revenue that the IRS collects annually has increased by a factor of 30 since 1960. That's $3 trillion collected presently versus $92 billion in 1960. Well, there you go. Now you know. There are over 1.5 billion tax-exempt organizations in the IRS. The U.S. tax code is over 3.7 million words in length. That's a lot of words, and it takes 70,000 pages to contain that 3.7 million words. Now, we said that over 130 million returns come in each and every year. Well, most people file those returns electronically. So at least we've got some trees that we're saving there. And of course, it's a good thing we're filing those electronically because the IRS has more than 800 forms and schedules. So think about choosing which one you need, and you've got 800 different ones to choose from. Almost 100,000 people work for the Internal Revenue Service. And here's a fun fact. In the 1940s, the new tax code expanded to include every American. So what was the IRS at the time asked Disney to create cartoons to put the new tax system in a favorable light. They created 2 cartoons, and both of them starred Donald Duck. There you go. Now, keep in mind, they did not star Scrooge McDuck. I think he has a better CPA than Donald did. That small box at the very top of your tax form that asks you to donate $3 to the Presidential Election Fund, that yields over $1 billion every year to that fund. So now you know where your $3 goes. Nation, in addition to celebrating tax day, and why not? Why not make it fun? It's something we all have to do. It is actually considered a right to pay taxes. So there you go. That might make you feel a little bit better. In addition to tax day coming up next week, I will personally be celebrating being at the Association of Water Technologies East Technical Training next week, of course, taking place in Cleveland, Ohio. And since we're on the topic of fun facts, why not have a fun fact about Cleveland? So Cleveland was named after General Moses Cleveland, and he was a brigadier general in the Connecticut militia. So if you're coming to training that's being held in the city that's named after the great general next week, please make sure you come find me. I absolutely love it when we have those conversations at live events where I get to hear about your experiences around this podcast and, of course, all your ideas. Sometimes people give me some suggestions. Some people give me some criticism. Whatever you have, I want to know what it is, because all of that makes sure that this show continuously improves. And it continuously improves because you are listening and letting me know how to improve it. So please, if you're coming, come find me. Now, I won't be hard to miss because I will be standing up in front and I'm teaching multiple classes. So chances are, if you're going to be there, I will be in front of you in one of those courses. So I get the pleasure of teaching the sales class that we do. Also, I teach the introduction to water treatment. And of course, I do water treatment math. Who doesn't love math? Well, let me tell you, Trace in high school did not love math. And in fact, I had a teacher that when we had to get our interim report cards filled out, she put an F down on my interim report card, and then she called out everybody's name to come get those grades. And she told me in front of the entire class as I stood up to go get my interim report card that I was too stupid to do math. Yes, folks, that actually happened. And that actually inspired me to go get a lot of math when I was in college. So that was my minor. I absolutely love math now. So I guess if you want to inspire me, tell me I can't do something. And I found some great instructors, some great professors when I was learning math. Obviously, I was inspired by that not so great teacher in high school. But it got me to meeting some wonderful professors in college. A lot of the ways that I teach are based on some of the ways that I learned math proofs from this one professor. And it really allowed me to take something that embarrassed me to something I really enjoyed. So I don't know what motivates you. That seemed to motivate me, and I absolutely love math. And I love water treatment math because there's so much chaos that happens in our day-to-day. Math is really the only axiom that we have within the water treatment industry. And I enjoy creating equations that didn't exist. If you've taken my math class, you've probably seen some of the equations that I created. You might be using some of the equations that I created. So anyway, math is fun, and I hope to instill that in everybody that is sitting in my math class. Now, maybe you're not registered, and if that's you that I'm speaking to, don't worry. There are still plenty of seats left. You can go to our show page. You can go over to the notes in this episode, or you can go over to our events page, and we will send you right where you need to go so you can have a seat next week in one of those classes that I just mentioned. And of course, there are going to be so many more. I cannot wait to be there next week. It's one of my favorite things that I do each and every year, and I hope that I see you there. Another thing that I hope I see you at, and of course, this is a virtual event, so you don't even have to go anywhere to do this. This is the Global 6K, and the Global 6K is coming up on May 18th, and this is so fun, and we do this each and every year, and it's fun, and it's serious. It's serious because you are supporting the end to the global water crisis, And the goal is that we are going to end that within our lifetime, one step at a time. Now, you might have noticed I called it a 6K, not a 5K. Why is that? Well, 6 kilometers is the average distance that a person that does not have access to clean drinking water walks in order to get their water. Now, in doing so, that creates a whole host of problems. One, a lot of times kids have to go get this water, so they're not in school, they're walking to go and bring back water. This also creates a very dangerous situation because along these paths, people will actually kidnap these kids and do horrible things with them. I don't understand people sometimes, but if we can get water to where they are, it eliminates that. So there's so many wonderful things that Team World Vision is doing, and we, of course, support them each and every year. And what they do is they use your donation for signing up for the Global 6K towards bringing water to these villages where they have better qualities of life. They can stay in school. They don't have to endanger themselves by walking far. All these things help everybody, and they don't just build wells and leave. They build a well or whatever the infrastructure is, and they teach the people how to take care of it. They are creating a culture of self-support and sufficiency, and it is just amazing all the things that they do. And you can read all about that by going to scalinguph2o.com/6K. And while you're there, you can sign up for the race. You can join our team or you can create your own team. It is something that you can do right in your hometown at your favorite park. You can do it with your company. Talk about a great team building exercise. So however you choose to do it, we've been doing this for several years now, and we always make sure that we use social media to connect with each other and show that even though we're in different cities, maybe we're in different countries, we are all out there doing the same thing for the same cause. And it is just a great way to unite and help us end the global water crisis. Once again, all that information is going to be on scalinguph2o.com/6K. I mentioned that one specific link, but all of these events, and even ones we haven't talked about yet, are all going to be on scalinguph2o.com. Just go over to our events section, and anything that we know about that pertains to the water industry, well, we've got that listed for you. We've got easy links that will take you to exactly where you want to go. It is an entire calendar of years of events, so you can make sure that you are guarding the time for the things that you want to do. And Nation, one of the things that I want to do is I want to get to our interview. I know you are going to enjoy this guest because you know this guest, and you're not going to have to wait any longer because here it is. My lab partner today is returning guest, and that doesn't even equate to how many times this guest has been on the show. It's James McDonald. James, welcome again to the Scaling Up H2O podcast.
Thank you, Trace. I'm so glad to be back. Thank you for tolerating me all these years.
Tolerating you? Are you kidding? So I know the Scaling Up Nation knows this story. Somebody told me you should do a podcast. I didn't know if that was a good idea. You were the first person that I called. You have been our biggest Scaling Up H2O fan since before we started. When we had ideas, we would come to you and see what you thought. And then, not too long after we started, you started doing segments on the show. James, you are every bit a part of this podcast almost since day one.
Thank you so much. I really enjoy being part of it, and I do truly appreciate it. And really, my number one goal was to just be on this podcast more than Mark Lewis. That's all I care about.
So it's been a while since we had my buddy Mark on, so we need to remedy that.
Yeah.
James, I get to announce you each and every episode. How long have we been doing segments on the Scaling Up H2O podcast together?
Well, the first one we did was James's Challenge, and then we did Thinking on Water with James, and then we did Periodic Water Table with James last year, and so that's been 3 years, and then we're started our 4th year right now with Drop by Drop. by James.
For some reason, it seems like we've been doing that for a longer time.
It does, because I spend a lot of my Saturday mornings either at home in my office or in the public library in a room I reserve there, just working on these. And it's a labor of love. I really have a lot of fun doing them.
Does your library have a podcast studio?
It does not. So I record them at home, actually, but I like to go to the library to work on the scripts and do the research I need to do for it as well. It's just a different environment. So that way I get my brain wrapped around it. If I'm working from home too much, there's 100 other distractions in the way.
Somebody was showing me, it wasn't a public library, but it was called like the Makers Lab, and it had 3D printers and all these other things, laser engravers, but also podcast studios. And this was available to the population just for being a member of that community.
I've been looking for a place like that. I've recommended it to our library as well, and they said that they would take it as a recommendation, but I haven't seen anything happen yet. But it's a nice library besides that. So.
James, one of my favorite things that you did was the flashback as we were teasing what was coming up for this year's segment last year. And you went through like a time travel device, and that was just so much fun. How'd you get the idea to put that together?
I always try to think of some creative way to share what we do audio wise. And I just was thinking of a radio, really. We're not listening to radio, we're listening to you, but we used to listen to people on the radio as we drive down the road, and the podcast is the next best thing. And I was just thinking of the old time radio and your interference you would get between stations. So that's what I tried to mimic. Hopefully the audience got what I was trying to do.
I thought it was fantastic. I enjoyed it, at least. I'm sure they did too. Speaking of feedback that I get from the audience, you never know how somebody is going to receive you once the podcast is out there.
Yeah.
You and I are on microphones, and we hope we put out a good product, but you never know. One of my favorite things is going to places like the AWT convention.
Yeah.
And then somebody will come up and they'll say, "Oh, I really enjoy the podcast. I felt alone driving from account to account, but now I feel like you're sitting in that passenger seat with me." And I also get comments how they love all the segments that you do, and how many people get disappointed if they miss one and they've got to go back and catch up. So 52 weeks a year, you're making sure people are thinking about what they're doing, how they're getting smarter. I don't know if I relayed that back to you, but people are telling me how much they're enjoying and getting out of that.
That's very kind. And when I do any of the stuff I do, it is wonderful if lots of people like it. But what gives me the most satisfaction is if at least one person likes it, because you never know how that one thing you do that may not matter to anyone else in the world can mean the world to that one person. So that's the way I view it, at least.
Have you ever gotten any negative feedback?
No, which is unusual in our world, but I think the industrial water treatment world is a few notches above the everyday world we deal with.
I don't think I've ever gotten any negative feedback either. The only thing I can think of, and I shared this on an earlier podcast, was we had a problem with the server that releases our podcast. And we do it at the same time on Friday. I think it releases at 1 a.m. on Friday, Eastern time, each and every week. And for some reason, it didn't release, and we didn't find out about it until maybe 12 hours later. And how we found out about it was I got an email, and it said, "Where the F is the content?" So at least they're listening.
Yep. That's what we find out here at work. A part of my responsibility is our digital tools, and how you find out if a certain part of a program is actually being used is when it breaks. And then you hear from the audience. If it breaks, you don't hear from anyone, then do really need that function. But when it breaks and you hear from people, that's one way to find out. You can send out surveys all you want. No one answers them. You turn something off, you find out.
Well, that's how the IT people do it as well. We just changed servers here, and we thought everybody was off of the old server onto the new server. And he said, "Well, we're going to find out real quick." He just turned it off, and we didn't get any complaints. So we proved it.
You got lucky.
James, when we were at the AWT convention this past year, We happen to be at connecting gates. You were at the gate right next to mine as we were waiting for the planes to depart. Mm-hmm. And Tom Tenney was nice enough to take a photo of you and I under some globe-type lights they had there. It actually made a really good photograph.
It did. I like the photo.
I received so many positive comments about that, and I want to say that the views were in the 7,000s.
That's nice. For the world of industrial water treatment, that is high. That really is.
So I think the Scaling Up Nation and the industrial water treatment community enjoys that you and I have gotten together.
Well, good. I enjoy it. So that makes two of us, at least one other person who told you that. So three of us.
One of the things I love that we're collaborating with, and I feel so honored that you asked me, and I've done two now, you asked me to do a voice on Detective H2O. That was like at the top of my bucket list, so thank you for that.
You're welcome. That's so much fun, and you've done a great job with it. And I know you stress over the accent you're going to use every time you do it as well. But it's fun. I have to work on my next storyline. I have a list of ideas, but work on my next one for next year. And we've really established, quite a few out there. We have the two you've done, the other ones I've recorded. And last year at the AWT, they have their auction for, what's their auction for? Pure Water of the World?
Yes.
Yes. And so I submitted, and there's only been one copy of this ever in existence. I put all the Detective H2O stories into a paperback book and auctioned it off. And it got bought up to help with the charity. So, and it was autographed not just by yours truly, but Dr. H2O, who happens to be modeled after my daughter. And I begrudgingly got her to autograph it as well.
And she's quite the artist.
Oh, she is. Yes, she is amazing.
You've shared a couple of things that she's done. I know she's done some work for some other water treatment companies and doing some ad campaigns for them. It's impressive what she's doing.
Yeah, she has. So she, whether or not her future career has anything to do with that directly, I've told her it'll serve her in many ways, regardless of what she does. Being able to communicate her ideas in multiple ways, and art is one way.
James, we're on the 6th, 7th Industrial Water Week.
I think this is going to be our 7th, because I think last year was number 6. Yeah. Who would have thunk? But people across the world, Trace, and I share with my connection. You share with your connections. You have an entire week, which I'm so grateful to all the time you put into that for doing it. And just like I dreamt, the holiday has grown beyond just, hey, this is something James did, because now this is something we did. And my name doesn't have to be mentioned with it anymore. And that's wonderful. I host the website for it, and industrialwaterweek.com. But I saw so much attention last year. People were really posting, and I'm just curious, this year what will be. But I'm so proud of what we do. And I'm sure if I had been anything else other than an industrial water treater, if I'd been a garbage man, a shoe salesman, a doctor, or whatever else, I would have been just as proud of what I do. And you would have probably seen an industrial trash week or whatever else as well, just so we can celebrate what we do.
Well, lucky for us, you found this profession, and we have Industrial Water Week.
There we go.
I've just been impressed with how many people will send something on social media. They'll hashtag a post. And how many people are doing cakes now on Friday? How cool is that?
Yeah, that is cool. Having a physical treat along with it to help make that memory stick in your brain. Hey, I remember when we had the water cake, on this Industrial Water Week. Or, I've done bundt cakes before from Nothing But Cakes on there as well. So because they're nice and round, you can get a nice big round one, you get 2 smaller round ones, and arrange them like a water molecule. So there you go. It's a nice picture.
Now, you mentioned the water cake, and we're going to go ahead and put the recipe up for this episode. It is the most vile tasting cake of all time. Now, some people like it. It's been rumored to be George Washington's favorite cake. Now, I guess there was no refrigeration back then, so that's why this was a cake that they would, I guess, bake around the campfire or something, because there was no refrigeration. We have refrigeration now, so bake a cake that tastes good. But if you want to try a water cake, we will put that up on this show notes page. And there was a company that their initiation for new people is the new person has to eat a water cake.
Wow. And hopefully the new person stays after they eat the water cake. But no, when we made it, my wife went a step further and made it chocolate. So actually it was pretty good. It was kind of dense, but it was still good.
Yeah, maybe that's what it needs. I think it needs a little bit more than that. But anyway, I don't want to, you might love the water cake. So if you're one of the people in the Scaling Up Nation that enjoys a delicious water cake, please, I hope I did not offend. James, we started out talking about the different segments that you did, and we all love them. You're now doing drop by drop. How did you come up with that idea? What do you have in store for us this year?
Yes. I like to mix it up some so that each year is a bit of a different theme. So it doesn't become too dry and rigorous or what have you, boring. But this year I came up with drop by drop, and that's kind of full circle because anyone who knows anything about me knows that one of my taglines is drop by drop, of course. And so as I thought about what I was doing, and I was thinking about sticking with the exact same theme all throughout a year, 52 times, or some years, 53 weekends even there, it kind of stifles the creativity throughout the year. So drop by drop is more of a variety show. And you're going to see lots of different types of segments. I think there was a challenge that just came up. There are some where it's like an imagine this. There's other ones where, let's think about this. So you're going to see a wider variety. Also, I'm taking a bit more time with production, and I don't know if I've crossed the cheesy threshold yet or not. Please, listeners, let me know if I have, but I'm throwing in a few more sound effects here and there, just go and spice things up. We'll see if I cross that. I don't want to be that guy from the 90s with a PowerPoint with every animation PowerPoint ever made in his animation. I don't want that to be my segment, but if it can enhance things, like if I go into, let's think about this or imagine this, just having a dream sequence kind of sound coming in there to help, illustrate verbally, audibly what I'm talking about. So that's the plan, a variety show.
Well, James, we messed you up last year, and the members of the Scaling Up Nation may not realize this. We realized it later, but we packed so much into Industrial Water Week. Production side said, you know what, let's not do a segment with James this week because we're doing all this other stuff. But we weren't able to make those 52 weeks. So you, in all your brilliance, made up for that on the very last episode of last year.
Yes, I did. And that's fine. I'm flexible. I go with these things. I don't get bent on the shape too often on things. So
You're pretty easy to work with.
Out. Yeah. And it was a nice surprise as well at the end of the year. And of course, I had to end on H2O. Of all the water treatment chemistries we deal with, I didn't make it the first one. I made it the last one because last but not least, water.
James, one of the things that I love everything that you do, but one of the things that I'm so envious of is that you're able to draw and you help people laugh at what we do each and every day. And how many different comics do you have now?
It's over 100. It's like 100 and maybe 32 or 34. I think I've drawn. I haven't drawn any here lately because they have to be inspired. And I find that if I force it, they aren't as funny or popular or observant or what have you. So, and the inspiration, sometimes it's a steady stream. Other times it comes in splurts. But I will find my muse again and draw more. Don't you worry.
I loved it when you wrote about the sale for industrial water treatment decorations. I always say that after the last podcast, and you actually turned that into a cartoon. It was amazing.
You inspired that. The after holiday sale for industrial water treatment. You could find coffee mugs and everything in that sale.
And by the way, Nation, if you don't know, you can go to the Industrial Water Week website, and James actually has swag that you can get, just like the mug that he spoke about.
Yep, I have a collection of mugs for every year. I forgot to buy one last year, but I need to get one because I'm building a wall of mugs for each year.
James, on our very first installment of Drop by Drop, our first episode this year, you took us through an RO device. And you basically shrunk us down and visually told us about all the different components of the RO system. How important when you're training people, when you're trying to get people to understand all the different things that we have to know to work on things, to visualize?
I think a lot of the people who work in our industry, in particular the engineers, but a lot more than just engineers, are very visual folks.
I know I am.
Yep, I am too. And any way you can help them picture it, besides just telling them about it, that's one thing. But if they can see it, imagine it, even if they can't actually physically see it, if you can help them imagine it, it's gonna help them so much more down the road in problem solving and understanding what's happening and understanding the impacts of what they're doing and helping answer questions for their clients. So it's a great learning tool. It's a great problem solving tool to be able to visualize what's happening. And I find that anytime within my job, I'm our director of technology and marketing. So marketing is half that. And anytime that on the marketing side, our team can come up with a video, our team can come up with an animation. That's quite a popular piece of content that we share on social media, on our website, and what have you. Our most popular video ever with 180,000 views, which is absolutely insane for industrial water treatment, is how does a cooling tower work? And it's very visual. It steps through each step along the way. Our second most popular video has just over 100,000 views, and that is water softener regeneration, but not just an animation. It originally was a cylinder that was a fish tank, but we turned it into water softener. So it was clear, it was acrylic. So you can now see physically what's happening inside that water softener. I'd always visualized it in my head, but little did I know what it really looked like when you fluffed up that resin. And the most shocking part of all of it, was the density difference between the brine and the water that was in there. The regular water was in there as it slowly pushed its way through in your slow rinse, in the elution part of it, and then slow rinse, because we put a red dye in the brine. And all of a sudden, you saw this stark line between the pink water, really, and the clear water down below. And when I came back and showed that to our engineers, we were all like salivating over it because we'd visualized that, but we never seen it. And so being able to visualize is important because we don't see a lot of what we do. Wastewater gets to see what they do. But for us, we don't see inside boilers. We don't see inside piping. So our next best thing is to use our imagination.
When I was 19, someone gave me the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And within that book, habit 2 says you're writing the plan for your life. And he says you can see it before you're actually creating it. And you can see if that's really something that you want to do. And I've used that mindset to do exactly what you just described. If I'm getting ready to do anything in water treatment, before I open my test kit, before I do anything, I try to, in my mind's eye, visualize what it is that I'm trying to do. And a lot of times I'll find a mistake that I could have made. Oh, I shouldn't do that. Let me redo that. And I didn't have to suffer the mistake because I did it through my mind. So I've got an idea for this podcast. So Scaling Up Nation, be patient with us. But as you know, James, and I think many members of the Scaling Up Nation know, that I'm a huge Back to the Future fan. And Dr. Emmett Brown, of course, invented the flux capacitor. And I have several flux capacitors around my office. I don't know if you can see over my shoulder. There's one right there in a little miniature DeLorean. What a few people do not know, maybe a lot of people don't know, is Dr. Brown also invented a shrink ray. And you and I are going to take advantage of that shrink ray, and we're going to shrink ourselves down, and we're going to go inside the cooling tower. Are you game?
I'm game. Let's do it. I can't wait.
Wow, James, we're pretty small.
We are pretty small. I didn't expect that to tickle quite as much as it did.
Oh, I think the tingling means it's working. So we're just going to go with it. Hopefully there's no long-term side effects with that. We didn't quite make it to the cooling tower. We're in the makeup line.
Yes, and there's a wall here. I believe it's the makeup valve.
What do we need to know about this makeup valve?
Yeah, where we are, we're right here in front of this valve. And so we're in the makeup water line. And so this makeup water can be lots of different types of makeup water, can it? City water, well water, recycled water, gray water, what have you. But looking at the quality of this water we're in right now with the conductivity, the chlorides in there, the silica. Oh, and I see some phosphate in here as well. I'm thinking we're probably a city water coming in.
Probably, and it looks like there might be some biologicals present as well.
Absolutely. So many people think that they open up that tap from the city and it is completely microbe free. And that's not exactly the case. That could be a source of microbiological contamination coming into your cooling tower as well in various forms, including Legionella.
Everybody's favorite L word. And of course, if we don't treat that properly, if we don't work with the customer properly, that can be an issue. And we've got many shows about that.
Yep, we do. Other things to think about in this makeup water as we're looking around here are the changes in pressure. Different pumps come on throughout the city, different usage rates, and whatever the pressure can fluctuate, which of course is going to affect the rate of makeup going into your tower. And temperature also can change, which may impact on a tower. Having cooler water is a positive thing. On an RO and other things, it could be a detriment to the quality of the water coming out or the performance of the RO. But right now, we're in a cooling tower. So lots of things to think about with the city water we're in right now. And we're surrounded by a copper pipe as well. But we really want to get past this makeup water valve. I really want to see the rest of the cooling tower. And what's going to trigger this makeup water valve? What's going to make it open, do you think?
Well, I would think that evaporation is going to reduce the water level and this valve's going to open.
So it's going to open, but there's got to be something else, whether it's magic elves or something out there that's going to trigger this valve, whether it's a motorized valve, so something has to tell that motor to activate, or whether it's a mechanical valve. And where I like doing this thought exercise of us being in this makeup water line is sometimes it'll identify weaknesses. And before I started this call, I realized I don't know a whole lot about all the different methods of level control on the cooling tower. So it prompted me to do a little bit of digging. Now, we're shrunk down in here and we still have our cell phones, so we could certainly Google on our cell phones as well.
Good thing they're waterproof.
Exactly. Yep. And I'm using my flashlight on mine right now because it's kind of dark in this pipe. But I was thinking about the level controllers out there. One that lots of people think about is like the one in the back of your toilet, perhaps. It's a big float out there floating around, and it's attached to a mechanical valve. And when the float drops low enough, the valve opens up and we start flowing in. That's one way. It is a mechanical valve. We've certainly seen times when these valves have failed and the float has come unscrewed and everything else, out there and is just dumping in water. But there's also ultrasonic as well, an ultrasonic level controller, a valve to open it up. And there's even probes, I think it was called, where it'll detect the water level with various length probes out there. And I believe you're conducting electricity across those probes. But those are three I can think of. And I really hope that as people are listening to us shrunk down in this cooling tower, they're out there screaming, you forgot this or you forgot that. Because if they're screaming it, they're thinking. And please let me know what I've forgotten as well, because the whole point of this thought exercise is to learn.
Well, James, it looks like that valve's getting ready to open. We're getting ready to go for a ride.
Yep, hang on. I have my raft here. So here we are, and it's a free fall in this case. It is a free fall. We are falling right out through the atmosphere into the sump itself. Now, depending upon the level controller you have, there are various advantages and disadvantages to different ones. And luckily, I'm not falling down into foam, because I've certainly had a cooling tower that I foamed up one time accidentally by unplugging and checking my pumps and plugging the pumps into the opposite outlets. So I was feeding biocide when I should have fed inhibitor, and I foamed up my basin, and it had an ultrasonic flow meter, and the foam confused the ultrasonic flow meter thinking it was higher. But luckily here, I'm not falling through foam at all. I am falling free fall into the water down below into the cooling tower basin. So kind of cool, literally, kind of cool.
Yeah, this is where all the cool water is in the cooling tower. So it is pretty enjoyable right now.
Yep. Now, I noticed that when I was on the other side of that valve, and even when I was falling down through the atmosphere, I was different than the water I just fell into. I wasn't anywhere near as concentrated as the water I just fell into. This water I fell into, it's about 4 times as concentrated. I'm seeing 4 times as many people, I guess, whatever, in this thing as what I saw in that makeup water. So there's something happening here to make that happen. But also, as I look around, one thing I noticed that I don't see Trace, and I'm so happy that I don't see it, are those fish you have mentioned in a previous episode.
Yes, the fish. I can't remember what episode it was that I mentioned it. It was right when I first started working with my dad, and I got dropped off to an engineer dropped me off with a janitor, and he kept saying, "Don't hurt my babies." And I thought he was talking about the kids, but no, we went up on the roof, and he opened up the cooling tower, and they were the most beautiful koi fish you have ever seen. They were probably 14 inches at least. And he was not happy with me when I told him to relocate his babies.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm so glad I don't see fish, but that doesn't mean that we don't see other slightly higher life forms out here as well, because I'm certainly seeing bacteria floating around in here, unfortunately. I'm certainly seeing deposits on the floor of this basin as well, some brown deposits because the cooling tower sucks in dirt as well in there, and perhaps some rusty deposits down there as well. And of course, living down in that biofilm, we're seeing there could be amoeba, paramecia, whatever else. I'm not a biologist, so you tell me if you recognize anything there, Trace.
I think you named most of the things I remember from my biology classes.
I know. So there we are in this basin here, and the water is cooler than what we just came from, and we're floating around. And we also, another difference in what we're seeing, other than the concentration, is there is new chemistry in here as well. I'm seeing some polymers in here. I'm seeing some phosphates and phosphonates in here as well. I'm seeing a bright young lad whose name is PTSA in here as well.
He is pretty bright.
Yep, he is pretty bright. So lots going on in this basin. And this basin is parts of it are really turbulent. Then parts of it are a bit slower as well. And I think that's by design, having a slower place, a fatter place in the pipes so that things can settle out. Because you don't want solids to settle out, your suspended solids in your heat exchangers, because it's only going to inhibit heat exchange. We don't want it to settle out within our fill. We want it to settle out if it has to someplace. We'd rather not any place, but it has to someplace, perhaps in our sump. But hopefully there's a filter on here as well to help get these dissolved solids out.
Well, James, if you look right over there, there's some sweeper jets that are trying to keep everything in solution.
Oh, man, that looks like fun. Yes, they are. They're trying to keep this stuff from settling on the bottom. That's fantastic. There's a few design issues, corrections we can do with it because it's not quite getting the entire floor, I don't think, but we can work on that later.
Now, it's too high to look outside. We can't reach that door. But if we could, I'm willing to bet that we'll see a sand filter or something that is filtering all of that.
Associated with that, too. Fantastic. I love it. So now we're in here and we're spinning around and we're seeing all of our buddies. And I'll tell you, our fellow water companions, they're quite a sticky lot because of hydrogen bonding. If you know what that is, it's my favorite kind of bonding in the chemical world is hydrogen bonding out there. So we're all sticking together. So I think it's time we move on to the next journey in this process, in this exercise, where we're passing through the screens at the bottom or side of the sump, and we're passing through the piping, and we're looking at the piping as we go. And this piping doesn't look pristine. It has some little rust on it, but it does look like before this tower was set up that they did do an exercise of pre-cleaning and passivation, I hope, as we go through here. And now we're at the pump. And this pump is quite the story, quite active, where the pressure is really beginning to increase as we go across it. But I've noticed some leaking around the seal. And as we know, the point of the seal is to help push back and form a barrier against the water escaping so that the rotating parts can actually rotate. And just a little bit of leakage past them with all those dissolved solids in the cooling tower, eventually, as that water evaporates away, can become very abrasive to a seal as well. So I think we should note that down in our phones here of something to look at later on with our customer. So here we are. I'm quite dizzy now after this pump. We're moving past it now, and we're moving on down, and we're seeing some takeoffs as well. Now, if we were to go left, we would take off through the actual cooling tower control scheme or control line where they have a controller online. There are various probes there. I would hope so, but I'm not turning left. I'm going straight. But if we turn left, we're going to see what? The connectivity probe. We're going to see perhaps a pH probe, maybe. Maybe we'll see what? An ORP probe going across there. But also, potentially, these may also be where the chemical feeds are located as well, where we're feeding in our inhibitors, we're feeding in our oxidizers, we're feeding in our non-oxidizers in there as well. I am curious what order they're feeding them in, because it seems everyone has their own preference between what order is best, and we could probably argue about that if we wanted to, but or arm wrestle. But right now, as we move on past that takeoff to our left.
Wait, James, before we move too far, luckily our phones are waterproof. There's remote moderate on here, so we can see everything that you just said right here on this phone.
And would you imagine that? Everything I just said actually exists on there. Wow. The magic of audio on podcast. So now let's move on down the pipe, and we're getting to the chiller. And we are not going to see every side of the chiller because the water we're in right now doesn't see every side of the chiller itself. We're only on one side of the chiller. We're on the condenser side of the chiller.
James, I wanted to add something there because when I talk with people, they never understand why it's called the condenser side or why the evaporator side. And it's because we're water treaters. We're thinking about the water. Well, they named it after the refrigerant and what the refrigerant is actually doing. So as we do this visualization exercise, that maybe helps people understand why they name things the way they do.
It does. You're right, because we are helping to condense the refrigerant on that side with our cooler water, our cooling tower water. But this is usually like a shell and tube heat exchanger, and there's something is on the shell side of the heat exchanger, something else is on the tube side of the heat exchanger. And in all the designs I know, the water is on the tube side of this heat exchanger. So we are passing into the heat exchanger, past the end bells, and turning to our right here and deciding which of these tubes, probably copper tubes, we're going to travel down. But also, I noticed something on my left as I make a turn, and I noticed something. It was like rectangular. It was like attached to the end cap. It's looking kind of fuzzy and crusty looking right now, but the closer I look at it, I realize that someone has installed a sacrificial anode inside this chiller as well.
You can even see some speckling around that anode. That's neat.
You certainly can. Yes, you can. And so as that magnesium, because that's what this one's made out of, as it corrodes away, you can see that the speckling there's a localized high pH right around where that happens as well. But that's helping protect the tube sheet, helping to protect corrosion for this chiller, because we have the highly conductive copper tubes fitted into typically a carbon steel tube sheet. And that's a recipe for a battery or galvanic corrosion. And between the two of those, which is going to corrode first, is going to be the carbon steel on the tube sheet. So it's very thick to help compensate for that. But if we can help control that as well with our chemistry, but chemistry only gets you so far for galvanic corrosion. That's a big force to fight against. But having a sacrificial anode can be a solution if applied properly.
Well, James, let's go ahead and go into the chiller tube. And I don't know if you noticed, but look how that copper pipe is protruding from the tube sheet and all the debris and stuff that's collecting all of that.
It is. It really is. And so I'm wondering about our performance of our side stream filter, or maybe what's happening outside the cooling tower right now. Maybe it's a seasonal thing and, crops are being harvested. Who knows out there? But something is happening here. And that's a great observation, because we don't want the underdeposit corrosion to happen there. We don't want microbes to be growing there. That's something to note.
Some chiller tubes are cut flush, and these aren't. I think that's an option people have to request when they get chillers these days, but I think that's a really good reason why they should get them cut flush.
There you go. I had no idea that was even an option.
I think everything is an option today for value engineering.
I think so, because it takes more labor to cut those off. So yeah, fantastic. So see all the things you can learn by doing this thought exercise with someone else or walking through it in your head on your own. So, but we're swimming down the tubes now. And these tubes can also have different designs within them, can't they? They can have rifling within the tubes as well. I've even seen tubes with, I don't even know the terminology, so I'm going to have to note this down so I can learn it later. But aren't there tubes with special inserts to help increase the turbidity as the water flows down through the tube as well?
There are, and that name is escaping me as well.
Yeah. So see, one thing we can learn, and hopefully have someone out there in the audience who can send us what that's called too. But flowing down through here, and this is really our entire reason for being here. Water's entire reason for being in this entire process right here on this side is for this one thing, and that is heat exchange. Because this chiller is doing something. It may be being used to air condition a building. So that heat that comes out of that person's body goes into the air, goes into the chilled water, goes into the refrigerant. And now it's our job right here on the condenser side to take that heat out of the refrigerant. Now we're making a phase change happen on the refrigerant side of things, but not here on this side. We're still liquid. So in this example, after all the processes we go through, I'm going to say we're picking up 10 degrees Fahrenheit of temperature.
It's definitely warmer here than when we first entered.
It really is. So we're looking at these walls of this heat exchanger, and anything that gets on this wall of this heat exchanger, if I lay my body up against the wall of this heat exchanger, I'm going to inhibit heat transfer. And we don't want to do that. So I'm looking through here, and it looks really good, actually. I don't see any scale. I don't see any deposits in here, but you could, and you do, going across there. But hopefully the heat exchange is going pretty well. And there's lots of readings and things you can look at as well on the chiller to see how things are going. But I think it's looking pretty good. I don't see, a large biofilm. There's always biofilm someplace, but, I don't see an uncontrolled one in here. Is there anything in here you see that I'm not noticing, Trace?
I don't, and we're running out of space. We're getting ready to come out of that tube. So I think we've seen what we can see.
I think you're right. So now we're coming out of that tube, and we may have passed through another time, but we're coming out of the chiller now, and we're still looking at this piping going through, and we're about to make it back to the cooling tower. And this is where we're going to spray out, and this ought to be a lot of fun for us, spray out over the top of the distribution deck of this cooling tower. It happens to be an induced draft cross flow cooling tower we are spraying ourselves into. And as we spray out of these nozzles, and we're spinning and we're spraying and we're landing on top of the fill, and we're beginning to find a path to drip and drizzle and fall down through the fill there. This is the second most important thing that's happening in this whole process. The first most important thing was the heat transfer in the chiller. The second most important thing is what's happening right now, because me in this gallon of water, and I'm going to say a gallon of water. I know that's not metric, but it's a gallon of water. This gallon of water I'm in is slowly getting smaller because some of this water is evaporating. And the beauty of this evaporation is that it's taking a lot of energy with it, a lot of heat energy with it. So that 10 degrees I picked up in the water in that chiller, I'm going to lose the 10 degrees here because of the phase change of water. And just for argument's sake, I'm going to say 100% of the cooling that's happening here is because of evaporation. You get some sensible cooling, cooler days, whatever, all based upon the humidity. There's a lot of determining factors. But I'm going to say 100% of the cooling happening around me right now is because of evaporation. Now, we're falling down through the fill here, Trace, and also I noticed a few small deposits in here as well. We saw some around the tubes protruding out. We're seeing a few deposits in here as well, because that can happen. Your suspended solids can find areas to stick to on the fill as we fall down. I've seen a few of my water buddies here try to escape out with the air, but luckily we have the drift eliminators on there to help eliminate any water escaping out of there. Anything else in here, Trace, you see in the fill, which I'm missing? I'm shining my light everywhere.
Well, James, if you notice on the very outside of the field, you really got to look far because it's hard to see. If we were on the other side, it'd be really easy to see. You notice that there's some evaporative salts that are drying on there. And I know I've heard people say that my program's not working because look at all that scale. What's really going on with that?
Yeah, you're right. Evaporative salts, the nemesis of the industrial water treatment guy, because everyone says it looks bad. And that's tough. Number one, the fill is mechanically designed to help eliminate that as much as possible. But it does happen. When it's out there, I really don't know of any water treatment that can possibly prevent that, because the water is evaporating away and leaving everything else behind in that. It becomes a cosmetic thing as well, but they're evaporative salts. Oftentimes, they're easily are redissolved by spraying it down, but you also have to be very careful with spraying it off because you don't want to damage the fill as well. That's my opinion on that one.
Well, I think it's a good opinion. And a lot of people, I think, will not let customers know really what that is. And then that leads to a bad conversation. So I'm glad we had that conversation. Thank you for that.
And so we're falling down through here as well, and we're falling out the bottom of the fill, and we're ending up back into the sump of water, almost where we started. We started in the makeup water line, but the valve opened up, and here we are in this basin again. And cooling towers were actually designed, the way I understand it, as a water saving measure. From back in the days where water was plentiful and they would run water through once to do the cooling and to be out in the stream or whatever after that. But cooling towers save a tremendous amount of water. And I was wondering, how many times does this gallon of water I'm surrounded by, how many times does this 1 unit of water get reused over a cooling tower? So, of course, I resorted to math to figure out what that is.
I love math.
Math, Excel, I derived the equation, I proved it in Excel. So I mentioned earlier that this water I'm in right now is concentrated 4 times more than the makeup water. So we're at 4 cycles of concentration, or as you like to say, Trace, our concentration ratio is 4 as well.
I think it's a more self-explaining term, which is why I use that.
So we're cycled up 4 times more concentrated. And some people I've heard out there say, oh, 4 cycles means you reuse the water 4 times. And I'm here to tell you, no, that is not true. You reuse the water far more than 4 times. Because just imagine this. So I come in as a gallon, running 4 cycles. That means that blowdown, I'm blowing down a quarter of a gallon. If I bring in a gallon, I have to blow down a quarter of a gallon, 0.25, to achieve my 4 cycles. How do I achieve that? By evaporating this water over the tower. Rule of thumb, every time this gallon of water goes over the top of the tower for a delta T of 10 degrees Fahrenheit, I have to evaporate 1% of that water. So every time I go over, 1% evaporated. Every time I go over, 1% evaporated. How many times do I have to evaporate away 1% of my gallon that keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller to finally achieve a quarter of a gallon? 1 gallon evaporated down to a quarter of a gallon, so I have my 4 cycles. Well, I've done the math, and that water has to go over that tower about 138 times. So instead of me using that water 1 time to cool down that chiller, I could use it 138 times before it finally is concentrated 4 times and I send it down the drain in this example.
I have never thought about that before, James, and I can't wait to see that math equation.
I will share it with you. Absolutely. I stay up at nights thinking about things like this. And you're like, well, that's great, 100% evaporation. But in my area, the average evaporation rate at a cooling tower is 85%. That's got to be better. It is. At 85%, you are recycling that water about 162 times. So if someone out there thinks my math is wrong or knows my math is wrong, please teach me better, because this is all part of the thought exercise. Go through asking questions, thinking about every little bit of what that water sees as it goes through the entire process, learning the parts you don't know about, like the level control, maybe as an example, and making a note of that so that then you can ask that you can learn later. You can research it. You can make it a question for the podcast as well. Trace, you're always asking people to give you a question to answer there. So there you go. But here we are, setting in the sump, bobbing around, waiting for our next trip around the roller coaster so we can evaporate another 1%. So eventually we end up going down the drain, going down the blowdown. Now, that's another part of this journey, though, isn't it? I almost forgot that part. So now we're waiting. We're at 4 cycles. We're like, man, it is time for, I need to be controlled, because anymore, and scale's going to form and whatever. Blowdown. Okay, blowdown. The controller activates the valve on the blowdown valve, or the actuator on the blowdown valve. Water starts to pour out. I am sent down the drain. But I think there is going to be, or there may have already been, a drop-by-drop segment asking about exactly this. When does the conductivity, when does the concentration of that sump water actually start to change? Is it when the blowdown valve opens, or is there a delay and something else has to happen first before that? But maybe I'll save that for that episode, for that segment.
All right. I think I know the answer, but I'll save it too.
So that's the journey, Trace. I like doing this because it teaches me the gaps in my knowledge. And when I'm driving down the road, I'll think of things like this. And people ask me where I get my ideas for my cartoons and for my segments and things. And it comes from doing the thought exercises exactly like this. I visualize driving up to a plant. I visualize walking into a plant. I visualize that water flowing into a water softener, past the resin, through the resin. I visualize the water inside an RO, around the membrane, through the membrane, the pressures, how the pressures change as it travel down the membrane housing, how the concentrations change, what are dissolved gases doing. All these thought exercises you can do.
All right, James. Well, before we get too far and have to go around this cooling tower circuit again, why don't we go ahead and get back to our original size?
Yes, let's do that.
All right. Well, hold on. There's a firmware update. I need to update the. Oh, it's almost there. 80%, 95%. All right, here we go. All right, James, we are now back to our regular size. I know that was kind of corny, but I think it proves a point that in your mind's eye, you can explore things and figure out exactly what you said. What are the gaps that I don't know about the equipment that I am charged with treating?
Yes.
What about when I'm testing? I don't have to be in front of a lab bench or in a mechanical room in order to test. I can do that in my mind's eye. And I can think about, oh, wow, what's that other reagent I need to go to the next step? How many minutes does it take for that? And I can then look it up, and I'm starting to memorize that. And let me tell you, if you're having to look at directions or procedures when you're running tests, it's probably taking you way too long with that. So there are just so many avenues that you can use this visualization technique with.
Yep, it has served me very well. And hopefully it will for our members as well. If I inspire them to do it as they're driving down the road, just please keep your eyes on the road and hands on the wheels at all times.
Yeah, I always have to remind people of that because there's so much content of the Scaling Up podcast that gets consumed on the road. So 10 and 2, people, 10 and 2. Actually, I think it's 3 and 9 now, isn't it? Didn't they reteach that?
In some places, yes. My daughter right now, I'm going through all of that, and I think she's being taught here in Texas 10 and 2. So.
All right. So wherever you are and whatever your hand placement is, just be safe.
Yes.
James, it's always fun to have you on the podcast. And you're always challenging people not to just know something, but to truly understand it and figure out what the why is. And you've got so many fun ways of doing that. Of course, we shared a fun way just now with visualization. And I love that's how you get all your ideas for the segments that you do in the cartoons. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome.
James, you've been on the podcast so many times. I'm running out of lightning round questions for you. I don't know how many different batches that you've answered. So we came up with a brand new one for you today. Are you ready for the lightning round?
I am ready as I could ever be.
All right. In one sentence, what's the most underestimated aspect of industrial water treatment that professionals overlook?
I think something that we do overlook is our creativity, the creativity of what we do. We're always told that the artists are the creatives, the graphic artists, the graphic designers are the creatives, the sculptors are the creatives. But I tell you, as an engineer, I know that we are a creative lot as well. The only difference is you got to be a little extra smart to see our creativity than perhaps theirs. I'm kind of biased in that statement, but we come up with solutions that when you look at them sometimes, they're absolutely a beautiful balance of the customer's needs versus physical reality versus what we can do. Beautiful things out there. And putting it into words is very creative as well. Putting it into a cartoon is creative as well. So I think something we miss is our creativity out there. I think it opens up our minds, and just doing this thought exercise we just did is a version of being creative in what you do.
I love that answer. Our service manager here teaches our team to be the voice of the equipment. And he loves to tell people chillers can't talk. You have to be the faithful translator of this piece of equipment so the customer knows what it needs.
I love that. That's creative. Love it.
All right, another creative question since you like those. So I'm going to say real quick, whatever comes to mind, you answer. Name your all-time favorite water-related movie, and why does it top your list?
Sharknado.
Oh my goodness.
No one thought I'd say that, but that whole series is the dumbest, stupidest, most fun, awesome series ever. And maybe part of the reason why I like it is because my daughter and I, we got really into it, and we watched the first 5 binge watching, and then we're like, when's number 6 coming out? And it came out the very next day, kind of thing. So it was perfect. But if you watch Sharknado, and you watch those tornadoes flying over top the cities, throwing sharks everywhere, they land beside cooling towers in some of the scenes. So I've taken pictures of that off my TV before and posted it on LinkedIn saying, look, there's cooling towers on Sharknado. So yeah, other than the obvious water themes of being sharks sucked out of the sea, I don't know. I just think it's hilarious.
James, true or false, Die Hard is a Christmas movie?
Oh, people are going to fight me on this one, but I say false.
Well, I will fight you. That is our quintessential Christmas movie. My lovely bride and I watch that every single year. And we pause when our character, John McClane and Hans, are right there at the cooling tower. Best scene in the whole movie. In fact, you can even see a Lakewood controller there.
You can. I've heard that story. I need to stop it at that scene as well. It is a fun show, but I'm a traditional guy. And to me, it occurs at Christmas, and it would be hilarious where I see the decorations of someone leaving snacks out for the guy at the air vent, over Christmas as part of a tradition. But sorry, that's one thing we actually disagree on, Trace.
All right. Well, you're wrong. Just as long as you know you're okay with that. All right. Last question. What are you binge watching right now?
Criminal Minds. We never watched it when it was live, and we came across it, and there's like 16 seasons and it made like 400 shows a season, and we're only like on season 10 of it right now. But for some reason, my wife and I, we really like the crime shows, and we like the thought that goes behind that. So that's what we're binge watching right now, Criminal Minds.
That's a good show. I will tell you, I had to stop watching it because it started showing up in my dreams. So just be careful with that one.
Yes.
All right, Jace, we've never done this before, and you don't know we're getting ready to do this, but you are going to announce your drop by drop.
I'm going to announce my drop by drop.
That's right. That's the next segment coming up, and you're going to lead us in.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, well, oh my goodness, let me get my thoughts here. So the very next, Drop by Drop by James. All ego aside of putting my name on it, because I like to have a name you guys can associate to having a friend in the seat beside you, whether it's Trace or whether it's James. The very next, Drop by Drop from James is this. Welcome to Drop by Drop with James, the podcast segment where we wonder, explore, think about, imagine, and learn industrial water treatment, you guessed it, drop by drop. Together. Today, we're thinking about safety. Working around steam, hot water, high pressures, moving parts, confined spaces, hazardous chemicals, pathogenic organisms, extreme environments, deep water, and even people. There are hundreds of ways we could get hurt or worse every single day. Of course, there are guidelines, regulations, laws, safety programs, engineering controls, training, and so forth to help keep us safe, but the ultimate thing in charge of our safety day to day is ourselves. Us. If we don't follow the rules, learn from the trainings, are unaware of our surroundings, or circumvent engineering controls, we are much likely to get hurt. So be both smart and aware when you're performing your industrial water treatment duties. You're probably not the only one out there relying upon you returning home safely. A personal example of when I encountered an unsafe condition is from when I was brand new in industrial water treatment and was being trained on boiler inspections. My manager and I were just about to enter the mudroom of a water tube boiler when steam started coming out of the manhole. My manager and the plant manager both looked at each other and were a little white in the face. An operator had blown down one of the nearby boilers, and steam had backed up into the one we were literally just about to enter. If we had climbed in just a little sooner, we could have suffered steam burns and worse. Neither lockout tagout nor proper communication had been conducted. Lessons were learned quickly very early in my career. I have heard stories of people dying in confined spaces due to the space being filled with nitrogen or argon. Proper confined space entry procedures had neither been established nor conducted. I've heard stories about water hammer blowing elbows, valves, etc. apart and injuring people. I once had a colleague who had live steam blown inside his work boot. Never have I ever seen blisters that big in my life. I'm sure too many of you have scary stories to tell as well. So please, today and every day, think about the safety of yourself and those around you. Your safety matters to you, your family, your coworkers, and your colleagues. Your safety matters to both Trace and me as well. I'm James McDonald, and I want to encourage you to be like water by forming bonds with those around you, dissolving new knowledge, and making worthy ripples, drop by drop.
James, once again, thank you for being on the Scaling Up H2O podcast. Thank you for your series, your weekly series, Drop by Drop. I thought it would be cool for James to do something he has never done before. And of course, that was introduce his own segment. And I really hope that you enjoyed James and I's attempt to visualize shrinking ourselves down and being in a cooling tower. Now, maybe that was a little campy, but we were trying to have some fun with it. The whole point is that using that technique of visualization is such an impactful way to increase your learning, because if you can see it, you are able to use your mind's eye to do things that you're not actually doing, and your brain gives you credit for doing them. I use visualization all the time. I use it to enhance skills that I'm trying to do. An example, and I gave this when we were talking with James, is I visualize when I run my test. And I will over and over again run tests and see, hey, if I run this test after this test, is that faster? Is there any benefit for me to change up the series? And I'll do it visually before I do it for real. And other people in the company have done that. So we have a specific series in how we run our normal battery of tests. And we've gotten that time frame down from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 and all the different tests that we run, that we can actually do them a little bit quicker. Now, when people run the test, we have them visualize actually running the test. So as you're driving around, maybe visually open up your test kit and start running your tests. Now, if you are new to this industry, this is just as good as you actually running your test. Like I mentioned, there have been a bunch of studies that show the mind does not discriminate if you did it for real or if you did it in your imagination. Nation, I might have told this story before. Indulge me if I had, but there's lots of evidence of how visualization really helps and keeps our spirits up, but also improves our skill level. Major James Nesmith was a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and for 4 years he was imprisoned in a cage that was 4.5 feet long by 5 feet tall. Imagine that. And how he kept himself sane in this cage was he visualized his hometown golf course and he played golf over and over and over again. He dug deep in his memory. He remembered every hole. He tried to remember scents. He tried to remember how things would change light-wise over the day. So he did this for 4 years. And then, when he got healthy enough after he was liberated, he played that golf course and he shot the best game of his life. Now, keep in mind, he hadn't played for well over 4 years. How amazing is that? That's what visualization can do. And that is a technique that we can use each and every day. And driving around to our accounts, we've got a lot of time to do that. Of course, listen to this podcast first. But after you did that, maybe visualize some of the things that you're doing. Like I said, I always visualize running my test. If I'm installing new equipment, I will visualize installing that new equipment. And I can't tell you how many times I would say, oh, wait, I need to grab a tea, or I need another elbow. And folks, you know that elbow that cost about $1 or whatever it is going to cost you about $100 if you forget it with all the things that you've got to do. Maybe $100 is cheap. So visualizing and drawing out all the things that you've got to do for an install, I can't tell you how much time and money that has saved. Here's another way I use visualization. When I pack for a trip, I will actually envision myself utilizing it. Now, here's an example. I'm a scuba diver, so I will visualize putting my equipment on as I'm packing it. When I pack my bags, I will actually pack it in a certain order so I don't have equipment all over the boat. As I take it out of my dive bag, it's going on me, so I don't have to worry about anybody kicking it off the side of the boat or maybe putting a tank on it and breaking it. I've seen that happen before. And here's the other thing I do. I will make checklists out of those things. So as I visualize, I'll make a checklist. And then for the first few times that I use that checklist, I will scrutinize it to make sure that it has exactly everything that I need. And if you look at my diving files, depending on what dive site I go to, I've got a checklist for each dive site to make sure I don't forget anything. And I might not have been to that dive site for a couple of years. Doesn't matter. I just pull up that packing list and I've got everything there. Well, of course, I've translated that over to the water treatment business. I've got checklists for so many things. And it's just, I don't want to take up space in my mind to try to remember something that I already knew how to do. And I want to make sure that I'm giving myself credit that I knew how to do it for later when I forgot how to do it. Checklists are fantastic, and they all start with visualization. So, Nation, I hope James and I inspired you to use visualization as a technique. And for all of you that are training new water treaters out there, please utilize visualization. That can start with a picture. And you put a picture up and you say, this is a cooling tower, and use my shrink ray if I'm not using it. I'll let you borrow it. And you guys can shrink yourself down. You can go into that cooling tower and you can talk about what's going on. Now, I did this for real. I didn't have the shrink ray, of course, but the very first team member that joined my team, I remember we went inside a cooling tower. We made sure it was safe. We made sure that we weren't going to decapitate ourselves with a fan belt or anything. We were safe. We knew how to get in. We knew how to get out. So all those safety things that we need to know, we did. And we sat right there on the crosswalk over the basin of the cooling tower. And we talked about what was happening, and we talked about potential issues. We were right there in that. And to this day, that individual mentions that when he trains other people. In fact, I know he actually takes people in cooling towers as well. So that is taking visualization to a whole nother level. But I think you can see what a powerful tool that is. So don't just learn it, visualize it. And Nation, don't forget, if you're going to be in Cleveland next week for training, please come find me. I would love to meet you. I would love to re-meet you if we've already met before. And for all of you that are not going to be in Cleveland next week, don't worry. I'm going to have a brand new episode so we can meet next week. Of course, we have a brand new episode each and every Friday. That's my commitment to you, to try to bring a little bit of extra joy in your life as you are driving from account to account. So until next week, take care, everybody. Do you wish you had your very own private tutor to help you prepare for the Certified Water Technologist exam? If so, I've got you covered. Don't fret another moment. Go to scalinguph2o.com/CWT prep today and take my CWT practice exam course. The course will give you the information you need to stop worrying and start taking the next step in your professional journey. Get the private tutor you've been looking for by visiting scalinguph2o.com/CWT prep.